Disclaimer, this episode may be triggering for some people. Sensitive topics are mentioned. Welcome to my Jesus story. This is part 2.
Okay, so life went on, and my children graduated from high school, and I was an empty nester, and a friend of mine invited me to come and live with her in Owensville area. So I moved out there, and it was September 30th, 2001. And I came home from church. Well, now, here's another thing. I got kicked out of a church about 3 months before this happened. So, she was going to the same church that I got kicked out of. I was going to a different church. I came home from church, and I was kind of like in a trance. And I heard God. Well, it wasn't his audible voice, but it was, the Spirit. I heard in my spirit, finish what I told you to do, pack your bags and move to Florida. I said, I would never live in Florida. But he told me to pack my bags and move. So she comes home from church, and she said, I have to talk to you, Dawn. I said, well, are you going to ask me to move? And she said, well, no, but Tony and I are getting married again. She had been divorced from him twice. The only man she ever been with. And she said, we're going to get married. And I told him I couldn't make you move. And I said, well, God just told me to finish what he told me to do and pack my bags and move to Florida. And she said, oh, thank goodness. I really didn't want you here. So that was pretty cool. That was God telling me you did the right thing.
Right.
Okay. So there's so much more to that. So now I'm living in Palm Harbor, Florida. I found a church, Countryside Christian Center in Clearwater, Florida. Senior pastor John Lloyd. While I was attending his church, some lady visited that day she went to the church, but she worked at the pregnancy care center, the local one there in Palm Harbor.
Okay.
And she was telling the people of the church that they had a Bible study for post-aborted women. Hello, God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And I went to that Bible study. And the very first night, there were all these women coming. I was there first. I'm always early. I'm always the early bird. And they started walking in the room, and I went, you? I'm thinking, you had an abortion? And then another lady walked in. I'm, you? Come to find out, we were all thinking the same thing about everybody. They saw me, and they were thinking, you? It just was unimaginable. And we were all ages. We were all different races. It was just, so we became a group of women. All I can say is a whole lot of forgiveness came about during that Bible study. It was 9 weeks of forgiven and set free. And I want to say something. If there's anybody out there who's listening to this podcast and you've had an abortion, there are those services right here in our city. Claremont County, Hamilton County, there's pregnancy centers that offer these classes on forgiveness and set free. So a whole lot of healing went on, like I said. The Lord even told me the reason I didn't think girls were valuable. And that's because my mom, I found out later in life, didn't think girls were valuable. And that's why she treated me and my sister the way she did.
Yeah.
If you remember, She told my sister, I wished I would have drowned you at birth. And she told me, I wished I would have never had you. So, wow. And what he said, remember, he said, the reason you had a girl for your second child, do you remember the prayer you used to pray to me when you were 12? I said, yeah, I do. I said, Lord, when I get older and I have children, if I have to have a girl, let me have my boy first. And I did. I had Adam. But then he said, you were going to name your second child Paul Jacob. But you had a girl because Paul Jacob is up here with me in heaven.
Wow.
So folks, if anybody out there who's listening to this, if you've had an abortion, know, and if you had your abortion after 72, know that my son's up there welcoming. He's looking over your aborted babies. Just know that. Because I believe it with all my heart. Because he's one of the first of the many that went to see the Lord in that manner. So my prayer at 12 years old had been answered twice. I had two boys first, and then I had my girl. Because I couldn't have had Paul Jacob twice. Mm-hmm. So, on December of 2003, well, I forgot to tell you, I got down in Florida November of 01. And part of this, when I got down there, how I knew it was God telling me, first of all, my roommate came home and said she was glad I was leaving. And then when I get down to Florida, after I drove a 15-foot truck, pulling my car on a trailer behind me, scared to death, going to a place I didn't want to go, but I was following the Lord. Right. I get down there, and he didn't tell me what part of Florida to go to, but I went to the Clearwater area because that's where my cousins lived, my dad's brother's children. So I get down there, and my cousin and I are looking for a place to live, and we can't find anywhere. So she said, well, let's go over here to this apartment complex. It was called Provident. Well, guess what bank I banked up here? Do y'all remember a bank called Provident Bank? I thought, okay. So I go in and I meet the lady who rented me the apartment. Her name is Lisa Dawn. My name is Dawn Elisa. I'm like, oh my gosh. This is God, right? Yeah. You're never going to believe what my address was. 509 Kendra Way. Kendra is my niece's name.
Wow.
I'm like, whoa, this is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So I knew that was God. Okay, so now I'm down there and I'm working down there as a nurse. I'm working in a Christian facility, which was great. There's so much more to that too. There's so much to this story. It was God all the way. And I want to have another experience like this with him. I really do. And I know it's going to happen. I know it is. So in December of 2003, I was sitting at my desk at the long-term care facility that I worked in. And I stood up to go to the nurses station to grab a chart. I heard the Lord say, mission accomplished. Go home and take care of your parents. Mm. I'm like, parents? I haven't seen my dad since I was 16.
Right.
when he told me never to come back. What are you talking about? So I sat back down at the desk and I wrote out my resignation. Gave a month resignation. Took it up, gave it to the director of nursing, and I returned back to Cincinnati in January of '04. I reunited with my father, and I drove to Xenia every other weekend to see my dad. For those of you who don't know where Xenia is, it's a city east of Dayton. And the first day I came home, my mom was living with me, okay? So we're living together. And, I go up to Xenia. Well, first when I got home, my dad was in the hospital. He was up at Miami Valley Hospital getting ready to have open heart surgery. And he told my brother, tell the girls to come to my bedside. So my sister and I went up to Miami Valley Hospital. And he looked at us, first time he's seen us in years, and he said, girls, I made a mess of things. I said, Dad, you can't change your past, but we can change the future.
Yeah.
He said, what future? I'm having open heart surgery. I'm probably going to die. And I said, well, Tina and I could die on the way home in a car accident. So our future is this point until Tina and I leave here. So we prayed. I told him I forgave him. He didn't have to beat himself up, but he still did. And he had his heart surgery. He went to a rehab. And he went back home, and every other weekend I drove to Xenia to see him. The first time I got there, he was remarried to a childhood sweetheart, to the woman who was my mom's character witness at the divorce. She was a friend of the family. So anyway, I'm there, and my dad keeps looking at his watch. 30 minutes went by, and he said, okay, you can go home now. I said, okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks. He said, okay. So I get home. Evidently, Janie, my stepmother, called my brother and said, he sent her packing after 30 minutes. I can't believe that. Da-da-da-da-da. And my brother was upset. He said, I can't believe that. You drove all the way up here, spent that amount of money in gas. Blah, 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 blah. He just went on and on. I said, Bob, stop. It doesn't matter how long I got to stay. It would have cost me the same amount of money. It would have took the same amount of time to get there. Dad and I got this. Stand back. So 2 weeks go by, and I called Dad. I'm going to come and see you. He said, okay. And I knew he loved ice cream. And I did too. I found out where I got the love of ice cream from. So on the way up there, I stopped off and got us some ice cream. I got to stay an hour that time.
Oh.
He kept looking at his watch. An hour went by, and he said, well, you better go now. I said, okay. See you in 2 weeks. It got to the point where, can you stay longer? Janie's not going to be here this afternoon. Could you stay?
Wow.
Yeah, Dad, I can stay. We wound up every other weekend. We would get in the car. We would go to the Dairy Queen and get ice cream. My dad him and his wife owned a Dairy Queen at one point. And we would go to the Dairy Queen, get ice cream, and we would drive around Xenia, drive around areas in Dayton where we lived when I was a child. And we reminisced about my childhood. And so the last 5 years of his life, I drove to Xenia every other weekend.
Wow.
My sister went to go visit him. He did the same thing to her. She called me. he ain't ever gonna change. I'll never see him again unless he asks to see me. I said, Tina, you and Dad will have to work that out yourself.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Right.
So the last 5 years of his life, he was in the hospital. And they didn't think he was going to make it. It was a Friday. I went to go visit him on a Friday. He was at Green Memorial Hospital at this time in Xenia. That's where I was born, at Green Memorial Hospital. So I go up to see him, and there was a hospice nurse in his room. And my brother was there. He introduced me to her. And I went in. I'm a hospice nurse, so I have experience in this area. So I go in the room, and my dad said, who was that? I said, she's a hospice nurse. He said, and I said, Dad, hospice doesn't mean you're going to die. You have to meet criteria. You have to have a 6-month that you're going to live for 6 months. And I said, but I've seen people go on hospice, go off of it for 2 years. Mm. You have to meet a criteria. Right now you meet that criteria. It's extra support for Janie and for you. And he said, do I have to go on it? I said, no, you don't have to go on it. So I went out of his room and I went to my brother and I said, Bob, I don't want to get involved because you have been taking care of Dad all these years. And I've seen siblings get in fights over their parents from being in the healthcare field. I said, but I do want to tell you that Dad wants to talk to his pastor before he makes a decision about going on hospice. Oh, Dad won't know what he's talking about. I said, Bob, I don't want to get into an argument with you, but Dad will know what he's talking about. So my brother went and talked to the hospice nurse and she agreed with me. So Dad's pastor came and saw him on Sunday and he told his pastor that he wanted to go to rehab and go home and be with Janie. So that was a Sunday. They discharged him that night to rehab and he died 3 days later. Oh. But he did it his way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But before I left that day, I said, oh, wait, let me back up a little bit. I'm sorry. So that was on a Friday. Before I left, I said, Dad, do you want to see Tina? And he said, yes. So I go home Friday night and I called Tina and I said, hey, Dad asked to see ya. So we drove up Saturday to see him and we were giving him a bed bath. My sister was in healthcare too, so she was an aide. So we were giving him a bed bath and everything. And, I said, hey, he couldn't take his eyes off my sister. He just kept looking at my sister. Wow. She was on one side of the bed. I was on the other. And he just kept looking at her. And I said, and his eyes were glassy, watery. I said, Dad, what's wrong? Too much love? Love you don't think you deserve? And he shook his head, yes. I said, by the way, Dad, I said, you never told me your testimony. You know mine. I said, are you going to go to heaven? I said, do you know where you're going to go when you die? And he looked at me in shock and he took his hand and he put it on his heart and he raised his hand up to the ceiling and he brought it back down to his heart and he shook his head up and down. Wow. Yes, I'm going to heaven.
Wow.
And then my sister and I, we got him all together and then we left and he died 3 days later.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then I took care of my mom until she passed away.
I think of God's redeeming love. He gave you the special last 5 years with your dad, that you didn't have. And he blessed you with that. And I imagine what a special time it was every single every 2 weeks being able to go and see him.
And because I forgave him, I was able to walk him through to forgive the people that hurt him in the past.
I think that you hit on something super important, which was, once they're gone, you don't get a redo. So you said to your dad, you had the opportunity, if he hadn't already accepted Christ, to say, you want to do it now? Excuse me. So you got a gift in knowing before he left where he was going.
Yes.
I just think that's a neat way to bring up, do you believe in God? Are you going to go to heaven? Point blank. I mean, it didn't have to be fancy. There was no, I don't know how to do this. You just said, do you know where you're going? Yeah. And he was like, I surely do. Huh. Nothing fancy.
And then, my mom passed away a few years later, and I was able to walk her through forgiveness of all the people that harmed her throughout her years. And she also received forgiveness for her part in the abortion. Oh. And during that, Bible study that I went through, Forgiveness and Set Free, I was able to forgive the guy who got me pregnant. I was able to forgive all the people, even though I don't remember them, that were involved in the procedure. I was able to forgive my mother. And like I said, I led her to that, and through her forgiveness of people, and she rededicated herself to the Lord. Wow. I was there. I walked her through it. I said, Mom, come on, say it. I'll say it with you. And so we said a prayer together, and she rededicated herself. And, she told me, she said, out of all my children, I treated you the worst. And you're the only one taking care of me. Everybody else has walked away. Yeah. Because my brother and my sister walked away from her. My mom didn't get to see my brother's children grow up. I don't even know them. I don't have a relationship with them to this day. But anyway, I said, Mom, God chose you to be my mom. He knew me before I was in your womb.
That's right.
God don't make mistakes. I said, when he chose you to be my mom, he wasn't thinking about me. He was thinking about you. Yeah. And she said, she said, I believe that. She said, I believe that. Now, I want to share one more thing with you before I end this story. It was May 8th, 2001. My mom had to get labs drawn. We went up to Mercy Hospital, and she got her labs drawn. It was 7:00 in the morning. She was fasting. I said, Mom, let's go home and have breakfast. I don't want to go home. I want to drive around. So we went to a restaurant and got some breakfast, and we ate in the car while we were driving around. We drove around Marymount. We drove around Plainville. We drove around Newtown, Madison Place, because that's where my mom grew up. We went to the Flagstone Cemetery there in Newtown, and we went to all the grave sites. Both sides of her family are buried there. So anyway, I said, well, it's about lunchtime. Let's go home and have lunch. I'm not ready to go home. She kept looking at the sky. Look at that beautiful sky. It's so blue. And the clouds were like cotton balls, it was beautiful white. The sun was shining. The sky was blue. It was a beautiful day, May 8th. It was a Saturday. So we went down to New Richmond, and we got some lunch, and we went along the river and had a picnic. We got out and went to a picnic table along the river, and Mom started reminiscing about how she used to ride the the riverboat up and down the river when she was a little girl. They lived along Columbia Parkway. And so anyway, but we're in New Richmond and, just reminiscing. So I said, okay, you ready to go home now? She said, no, I want to drive to Chillicothe. So we drove to Chillicothe. Huh?
2 hours away.
2 hours away. Well, not from New Richmond. So we get to Chillicothe and we're driving around reminiscing and so forth. We get home around 6 o'clock that evening and my telephone rings. It's her doctor. Dawn, get your mom to the hospital right away. Her labs are very concerning. I said, oh man, we've been gone all day. We've been driving around and she's been looking at the sky and we've been reminiscing about her childhood, my childhood and just everything. And she said, I can't believe your mom felt like doing that.
Wow.
I said, well, we're on our way to the hospital. So I got mom back in the car and we went to the hospital and we're up at Our Lady, or Mercy Anderson. We get in the emergency department and they said, Jerry, your labs are concerning. You're in renal failure and there's nothing we can do for you. You've only got days to live. I said, Mom, you want to go home and die? I had been her paid caregiver the last 4 years of her life. 5 years, whatever. I was her paid caregiver. And, she said, what are you talking about? I am home. Remember, this hospital sits on the property that my grandmother owned as a farm, and I was born on this property, and I'm going to die on this property. Mm-hmm. I said, okay. So, that was May 9th. That was Mother's Day. May 8th. That was May 8th, but on May 9th, the next day was Mother's Day. And then she passed away on the 13th. But before she died, she said, I only have one regret. I said, what's that, Mom? I never got to see my Carrie and her 2 other grandchildren. I never got to see Carrie and Kyle grow up. I said, Mom, that's not your regret. That's Bob's. That's not your regret. You had nothing to do with that. She said, you know what? You're right. Then she said, well, the only thing I don't want to do is I don't want to leave you here alone. I said, Mom, the arms that are going to be holding you are going to be watching over me. Yeah. And I'll see you soon. But back up a little bit. That day before she passed away, everybody was there. All of her grandchildren except for Carrie and Kyle. And Bob wasn't there. He came the day before to see her. And my sister had already passed away. But my mom looked at everybody and she said, don't you guys worry about me. It's gonna be beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'll just send it there.
All right. I have a question.
Okay.
You have joy. You have a joy that kind of just pours out of you like a happiness. Like you just want to hug everybody. Because I think I got a hug from you when you first got here. But how do you go from the childhood that you had and the things you've experienced to the smile that I'm staring at right now? You're just smiling.
Forgiveness and set free.
Forgiveness and set free.
It's all biblical.
So you can.
That's where I give that. You know, my mom always called me a peacemaker. She said, you're the peacemaker of the family. She always told me that.
Wow.
After I was an adult.
Yeah.
You want to know something else? I never heard my mom tell me she loved me when I was a little girl. But the last several years of her life, all she could do was tell me, you know how much I love you, I love you, I love you. And I got tired of hearing it. Never heard it when I was little, but I got to the point where I was tired of hearing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Gosh.
I know. I do have joy. I have no regrets.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we'll go back. Can I say something about my brother?
Yeah. I mean,
a couple of years ago, I was at my brother's house, okay? And he was trashing our parents. Mm-hmm. First of all, let me tell you, my dad was the best parent of the two when they were together. My dad, because of his past life, all he wanted was to have a family that he didn't have. And he was trying to make that happen. My mom was so messed up from her life, past life. None of this came to light until later, okay? Later in life, their stories came out. They both had terrible situations. But you had two people that didn't know each other's story, and they were going at each other. Well, my mom was really the one going at my dad. My dad he was such a good man. He really was. And he just didn't know how to cope with the divorce. It was so bad that my dad had a plan to kill the whole family and kill himself.
Oh my goodness.
But thanks be to the Lord, my dad was on his way out of the house to go to work. He worked third shift. And my mom said, Bob, I want a divorce. My dad's never hit my mom, but he went over to her and she was sitting on the couch. This is how I heard it. And he came at her with a closed fist and he realized what he was doing, but he couldn't stop. And he opened his hand up and he hit her face with the butt of his hand and he went to work. My mom called Grandma and said, Bob just hit me. She was in Chillicothe. We're in Xenia. So she gets in her car to come to Xenia. Us kids are upstairs in bed. We have no idea what was going on, okay? My mom's stepdad called Xenia police and told them what happened. And everybody knew my dad. I mean, everybody in Xenia knows everybody. It's like Bethel, I guess, huh? Everybody knows everybody. So anyway, Grandma, the police started patrolling the area and just kind of keeping an eye out for things. And Grandma gets there and she walks in the house and she says to my mom, where's Bob's guns? And Mom said, they're in the basement in a lockbox. There's probably a dust on them foot high. And Grandma said, go get them. And Mom kind of put up a fight. And Grandma said, go get the guns. So Mom went down and got them. And she said, put them in the trunk of my car. My dad loved my mom's mom. He loved her. I didn't know my dad didn't like his mom until later in life. But he loved my grandma, my mom's mom. He thought of her more of a mother than he did his own mom. And he came home and he asked, what are you doing here? She said, you hit my daughter and I came to protect her. He went straight to the basement, came upstairs. Where are my guns?
Oh my goodness.
Grandma said, they're in the trunk of my car and you may pick them up at the police station on my way home. I'll drop them off there.
Wow.
He wound up at Dayton State Hospital. That's a mental ward. And he was going to kill all of us and kill himself. And I think he was upset because he was going to have to kill Grandma too. That's why I was so upset that she was there.
My goodness.
Yeah. So he had a mental breakdown. And I think that was his way of, I found out later after he passed away, my brother told me this. when my sister and I would call him when we were little and we'd say, Daddy, we want to come and see you. We want to come and see you. He said, oh, you can't come because you make Janie nervous. Found out after he died, he told Janie. Janie would say, why don't you ever get the girls? Jerry won't let me have them. So see, he just couldn't, that was his way of dealing with the divorce.
Yeah.
He couldn't be around us because it would hurt him too much. You know?
Wow.
So I got to, and I think because of my medical background, going through the forgiveness and set free thing, it made me I could understand my parents. Mm-hmm. And what I was going to tell you before, as my brother was bashing our parents, I said, Bob, they were hurting people. Give them a break. Mm-hmm. I said, you know, Mom used to say, I wish I would have drowned you at birth to Tina. And she used to say she wished she would have never had me. He said, Dawn, how do you think it made me feel to hear my mom say that about my sisters? I said, well, Bob, I never thought about that because she loved you. Mm-hmm. Bob this, Bob that. I said, I never thought about that having a negative effect on you. Mm-hmm. He said, well, it did. Yeah. How do you think it made me feel that my dad was telling you girls that you made Janie nervous and telling Janie, Mom, how do you think that made me feel? I said, well, I didn't know that was going on, for one thing. So I said, but Bob, you got to find it in your heart to forgive them. Mm-hmm. They were two hurting people.
Mm-hmm. You give such light to different perspectives, like the parent of a child who had an abortion. I've never thought about the parents' reaction or how hurt they must also feel.
Right.
Especially if it was a forced situation like yours was.
Right.
Just, there's so many different perspectives in your story that you share. I don't know, you're kind of blowing my mind a little bit, Dawn. That did some serious note taking.
Yeah. I understand, but I just want other people to receive that. I want them to be able to take responsibility for what they've done, because you know what? If I was a virgin, my mom wouldn't have had to make that decision. If I hadn't gone to that party, my mom wouldn't have had to make that decision. I'm not saying she was forced to make it, but that was the decision she made. Mm-hmm. And I was 17 and she wasn't going to raise another kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's so much more to this, you guys. There really is.
We will have to have you back in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want me to.
For parts 2 and potentially 3. Maybe 4, I don't know.
Well, I mean, there's so much in between that I didn't share that really has a lot of meaning. Oh, can I share one more thing?
Yeah.
So I get back from Florida in 2004, right? And I get this job at Mercy St. Teresa, which used to be Our Lady of Mercy Hospital. Now it's a nursing facility. And I go there to work, okay? And I'm a second shift supervisor. I share this with you?
Possibly.
So there's this young nurse there. Well, she's really probably about my age. I'm older than her. She's in her 30s. And I go up to her nurse. She was at the nurse's cart, and I walked over to her and I said, what's going on with you? You don't seem yourself. She said, I'm pregnant. And my husband, they already had like 4 kids. She said, my husband and I want to get an abortion. I said, oh no, you're not doing that. She said, what? I said, let me tell you my story. So I told her how it ruined my relationships with people and how I became a helicopter mom, and her daughter's 22 years old today.
Wow. Praise God.
I ran into her about, 11 years ago. I went back to nursing school and she was there going back to nursing school we were going to get our RN. And she said, Dawn, I'll never forget what you did for me by sharing your story with me. And her daughter was probably, 10 at that time.
Wow. And you can see, as you're sharing your story throughout the entire thing, you can see God's hand on every part of it.
I know.
And he just worked everything out. And
what the devil meant for bad.
Yep. That's right. Yeah. He redeemed everything. And look at you today. It's a redemption story, truly. So, yeah. So, our last question that we ask every person who is on, you're sitting on a bench with Jesus, you look at him and say,
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. As I bow before him with tears, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for the people that sowed into my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you, Dawn, for coming on today. We appreciate it. We just loved hearing this part of your story, what you had to share today. So thank you so very much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate being here.
And thank you for listening to today's episode. Join us next episode for another encouraging testimony on My Jesus Story podcast.